The video opens with a title slide that reads Table Manners, which is followed by a close-up of a ceramic plate on a black marble surface. The plate contains several round green vegetables and a brown puree in a small plastic container. Next, a title slide that reads, Grace Eats Garden Eggs with Spicy Groundnut Butter, reveals the name of the meal and introduces the subject of the film. In the next shot, Grace, an older woman with curly black hair, sits at a small table covered with a printed tablecloth. She smiles briefly at the camera, then begins eating, picking up a garden egg with her hands and dipping it into the groundnut butter. The viewer hears the robust crunch of the egg as Grace takes large bites. She maintains eye contact with the camera as she chews. The bright pink background throws her into sharp relief. Picking up a napkin placed to the side of her plate, Grace dabs at her lips, though she is unsuccessful at removing a fragment of garden egg from her lower lip. She takes another bite of the egg, licks her lips, removing the fragment, and the video ends. The short duration of this work from Zina Saro-Wiwa's Table Manners series contrasts sharply with the artist's framing of the video as a television season. The film, entitled Season 1, introduces an alternative paradigm in which a 49-second video can be considered equally as substantial as a full television season. The two shots in the film are markedly different. In the close-up on the food, the garden eggs and groundnut butter occupy the spotlight. The space in which they are placed is not prepared for a human presence, as it lacks the tablecloth and napkin viewed in the second shot, and Grace is absent from this scene, not even pictured fragmentarily in the background. The artist's aim seems to be to cause the viewer to focus their attention on the food, first experiencing its appearance, its color and size, then its texture. Grace seems to serve three purposes. First, she addresses the viewer through her smile, indicating that they're symbolically sharing the meal with her. Second, her biting into the garden egg allows the viewer to experience the food more fully by hearing its sound. Thirdly, Grace performs table manners. While certain aspects of the work, Grace's makeup, hair, and dress, the pink background, and her almost unbroken eye contact with the camera indicate that her eating performance is just that, what is striking is her failure to perform. When she dabs her lips with her napkin, Grace demonstrates what are today considered proper table manners in Nigerian culture as well as in Western culture. However, she does not successfully clean her lips until she licks them a moment later. This licking could be read as an expression of satisfaction, an instinctive human response to good food that interrupts Grace's performance. In capturing this moment, Saro-Wiwa presents a swift yet robust engagement with the food, people, and realities of the Niger Delta and challenges the notion of table manners. Initiating the viewer into a paradigm in which eating with the hands is normative, the artist reveals the inability of table manners to conceal the pleasure and by extension, the humanity of the eater. Presenting the food visually before offering a written description of the meal, Saro-Wiwa first entices the viewer to the food, then causes them to, as she says, ingest its names. The deliberateness of Grace's smile, chewing, and cleaning of her mouth speaks to the important ritual of eating. The close attention Saro-Wiwa pays through her camera work to the food's visuality and texture and to Grace's eating urges the viewer's attentiveness to what the artist calls the powerful exchange that takes place when one watches a meal being consumed. Taking the Western notion of proper dining etiquette head on, Table Manners offers food for thought and thinking about and questioning Western modes of exhibition. At the Cranmer and Blaffer Art Museums at the University of Houston in 2016, Tiwani Contemporary in London in 2018, and the Fowler Museum in Los Angeles in 2019, the 8 videos in the series were installed on separate screens and seating placed in front of each. This causes the viewer to position themselves at eye level with the work's subjects, which creates a non-hierarchical relationship between viewer and subject and relates to Saro-Wiwa's aim to simulate the experience of sharing a meal. This use of seating also creates the potential for prolonged viewing. I propose that in presenting Nigerian cultural practices on screen, Table Manners offers an invitation to adopt what I would call Nigerian spatial logics in the curation of the work. The work's request of the viewer to sit and eat with its subjects could be pushed so that not only functional seating, but a lavishly comfortable and accessible space could be installed around the work. This installation could take inspiration from dining rooms in the Niger Delta and be adapted to the local context in which the work is presented. In fact, I would argue that the installation must incorporate aspects of its local context, as simply putting Niger Delta homes on display is an approach that would verge on the ethnographic. Here, I'm influenced by writers and scholars such as Gloria Ansaldúa, Amy Lonetree, and Nelson Maldonado Torres, who have shown how the framing of indigenous cultures and experiences in and beyond exhibitions can articulate them as static or out of space and time, out of human space and time. This strategic framing allows curators and institutions to continue collecting and exhibiting according to their own frameworks and agendas. I'm also influenced by curator Marcela Guerrero, who says that to talk about indigeneity is to speak in the present tense. I would propose then a form of exhibition design as hybrid and ever evolving as Saro-Wiwa's own geographic and cultural affiliations as an Ogoni artist based between Los Angeles, Brooklyn, and the Niger Delta. As Ansaldua says, the museum, if it is daring and takes risks, can be a kind of borderlands where cultures coexist at the same site. Having imagined these possibilities, I question why Tiwani Contemporary and the other galleries who have exhibited table manners did not go further to allow the work to transform the gallery space. Despite facilitating Saro-Wiwa's vision in terms of the use of seating, the gallery's curation does not destabilize the look and feel of the white cube. For me, this creates the risk of undermining the aims of Saro-Wiwa's artistic project. Though the wooden benches and stools enable the viewer to sit across from the work subjects, they do not approximate the comfortable seating used during meals. Though invited to be transported to the Niger Delta, the sitter is reminded by the stool's hard surface that they remain in the gallery. One could argue that this curation of table manners centers ways of hosting and gathering that are inconsistent with those of the subjects portrayed in the work, and further, that the curation centers certain able bodies that can withstand such seating conditions for a prolonged period of time. I propose an installation of table manners that incorporates elements of domestic spaces in the Niger Delta and in the local community of the exhibiting institution, particularly, if possible, the homes of the local Nigerian diaspora. In addition to thinking about the curatorial possibilities that table manners suggests, I consider what my personal experience of the work might say about access, specifically my access as a curator. While the curatorial process is often spoken about mainly in terms of conceptualizing and executing an artistic project, I would argue that my experience of table manners speaks to elements of curating that are less discussed, but in a sense, no less crucial. I attended the opening of Saro-Wiwa's 2018 exhibition at Tiwani Contemporary, as well as the opening night dinner. The tasks involved in organizing such an evening, from curating the guest list such that it strategically positions the artist in relation to other institutions, to the gendered and sometimes ageist labor of making the dinner reservations, are all tasks that I've performed or helped perform in the course of other curatorial projects. Curators organize opening night dinners for a range of reasons, one being tradition. As art historian and curator Susan Kahn shows, this practice speaks to the class roots of the art world. Kahn writes, until the late 1960s, public openings were not yet common practice. Harry Parker, who joined the Museum of Modern Art staff in January 1964, has described the social milieu. When I came to the Met, a typical social event would be the acquisitions dinner, at which the acquisitions committee and the curators would all dress in black tie for the evening meeting. Everybody would have a couple of drinks and sit at a formal table with all the waiters and the glasses of wine and all the rest of it. One curator would present the object that he thought ought to be bought, and another curator would get up and do the same. But it was all presented as a social occasion for the 8 or 10 members of the acquisition committee who would sit and debate the presentation. The events were meant to support and sustain the trustees' sense of importance and their collegiality. They all knew each other, they all went to each other's parties, and they were all part of a social world. The opening night dinner is arguably derived from this practice. The dinner I attended looked quite different from the one described here. The other guests and I wore our after work best, our world business casual that we likely spruced up a little bit for the occasion. The restaurant we dined at was nice, but by no means black tie, and we were not expected to acquire Saro-Wiwa's work, but we were considered to have some power to affect its trajectory. Then a curator at a London institution, I remembered being seated with 2 fellow Black arts workers, a writer and a teaching artist. I speculate that the gallery hoped we would respectively write about, teach, and exhibit Saro-Wiwa's work. The commercial art world needs artists to be exhibited in non-commercial exhibitions, taught and written about in order to ensure their longevity. The indirect way in which Saro-Wiwa's gallery communicated their hopes for the work speaks to the informal, tacit, and yes, cushy ways in which art world business is done. Thinking about Zina Saro-Wiwa's table manners from my perspective as a curator generates particular considerations of how the work functions. And thinking about my experience of the work in relation to art world practices around exhibitions allows me to illuminate not often discussed aspects of curatorial labor. Critiquing the curation of past iterations of table manners inspires me to imagine curatorial methods not only rooted in Western art historical, ethnographic, and colonial practices, I've outlined some preliminary ideas for future curatorial projects that take greater inspiration from Saro-Wiwa's practice. A stimulating invitation, Saro-Wiwa's Table Manners offers the opportunity to consider cultural norms, the politics of food, and the simple potency of eating a meal together. I'd like to end by thanking my co-chair, Nicole Fleetwood, for giving me space to develop this paper, and Zina Saro-Wiwa for her brilliant work.